Well, welcome to another episode of Behind the Book, Sheroes Unlimited Behind the Book. I'm Jaynie Morris, and it's my absolute pleasure to have your company once again. Or if this is the very first time that you have tuned in to our Behind the Book podcast, welcome. And if you'd like to catch up on any of the other episodes, and there are so many, make sure you just go to SheroesUnlimited.com or wherever you get your podcasts, and you can catch up on all of those because we've got so many. What we do is we like to shine a light on female authors that have written a book or a series of books or something that we believe can make a difference in your life. So it's great to have your company. My guest today is a very special woman. All women are special, but Melody Horrill is just that little bit more. And the reason is because we're going to talk about her new book that she has recently released. And the reason that she's a little bit more special is because she has a friend called Jock, and he is a dolphin. And it's a different story. It's not a children's story. It's not a story about animals in general. It's a story about life. And many of you are going to relate to this. Now, Melody is an old friend of mine. Oh, and maybe I won't say the old. We'll throw that one out the door. She's a journalist, TV presenter, media and communications commentator. She's a speaker, and as I said, she's also an author. And it's my absolute pleasure to have you as my guest today, Melody. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Jaynie, and it's really lovely to see you again.
Yes, it's been quite some time. Actually, I was thinking about that this morning before we started our interview, and I hate to say it, but I think it's over 15 years.
It probably is, actually. I think you're right, but I've got to say you haven't changed a bit.
Well, I was thinking that here we go, the girls complimenting each other. I was thinking that when you and I were off camera myself. So I am looking forward to catching up with you in person in the very near future. But let's get right into it. Melody, congratulations on your incredible book that you have just released, A Dolphin Called Jock. I must say that, and our listeners know my personal story of domestic abuse as well. I must say that your book, I thought when I started reading it, might trigger me. And so the reason I'm sharing that with our audience is because I know a lot of people will be listening or watching this right now, knowing the backstory of your book and might be a bit hesitant. Let me tell you, as I read your book, there was no triggering, there was just embracing and empowering. So my personal review on your book. So let's talk about you first before we get into the book. You were actually born in the UK and you came out here as a child, didn't you?
I did. I was 8 years old when my mother and my father decided to relocate to Australia. And I had two older sisters in England with me and a brother who was the middle child, if you like. The two sisters were twins. And my sisters decided to stay in the UK. They were 9 years older. They are 9 years older than me. And so it was my brother, my mother, my father and I relocated to Australia when I was around 8 years old. And Australia back then, it was such a long way away. It just felt like a different planet, really. So the thought of coming to Australia was quite scary, but I'd hoped that it would bring a fresh start, actually, to the family, even though part of it was staying back in the UK. So yes, I grew up in Cornwall for the first 8 years of my life, very pretty little cottage in Cornwall near the sea.
And so you mentioned, you touched on there, Melody, a fresh start. Can you share with us a little bit more on that?
Sure. So essentially, without going into too much detail, my parents had a fairly violent marriage. They just seemed to hate each other, to be quite frank with you. And there were frequent violent eruptions in our household. My father and my mother, to perhaps a lesser extent, involved the children in that sometimes, and it wasn't a pleasant place to grow up. It wasn't pleasant at all. Not only were there these horrible, violent episodes between my parents, but in between those violent episodes, there was also this, and I try and describe in the book, it is this sense of unease in the house, that even when there was peace, there really wasn't peace. It was just this sort of simmering tension, and we were all just wondering when the next violent row would erupt. So when my father announced actually that he had got a job in Australia and we were moving to Australia, part of me thought, okay, well, this might actually be a fresh start for us. Maybe if we go to this new country and we start again, and even if it's just, and it was just my brother, myself, my mother and my father, maybe things would improve. But that wasn't to be the case, unfortunately.
So you arrived in Australia at 8. You were, weren't you? Yes. You arrived in Australia at the age of 8. And so tell us what led you over the years then to get into your passion of journalism, and how did that all start?
Well, I obviously grew up, spent in Adelaide. We relocated to Adelaide, and the fights between my parents continued and gradually got worse. In a nutshell, my mother and I ended up leaving the family home one day after a terribly violent fight, and we moved into a little flat together. And my father found out where we were living, and consequently then started stalking us, and that led to a very bad attack and him being in jail. So at that point, I was about 16, 17. I had to testify against my father in court to put him in jail because I was the only eyewitness to the attack. But I was at this point where I just didn't know what to do. I mean, I loved English. I loved writing. I always had a dream of being a journalist as a young girl. My grandfather was a journalist, actually. But I didn't think it could be realised because I had to leave home quite young. I didn't finish my schooling, and I was very much lost. I just wasn't sure where I was going to end up after this awful situation at home. So I sat on a beach at Aldinga and thought to myself, what am I going to do? I can't, I had to basically break the cycle. I had to get myself moving. I had to get myself motivated. I had to think about what next with my life. I really had two choices. I could just dwell in the awfulness that had happened to me and the family, or I could make a choice to move on. So I made the choice to move on. And to do that, I had to go and complete my education. So I went back and did year 12. I was about 19 at the time. And it was as a mature age student at TAFE. And of course, my school was good enough to get me into university, which is how I got involved with the Dolphins. And my lecturer at the time was studying the Port River Dolphins, Dr. Mike Bosley. And I was, as a student, just fascinated with the idea of going out onto the water and seeing these dolphins that live, 20 minutes from the city. I couldn't believe it. And that's how I started becoming involved with the dolphins, and in particular one dolphin, a dolphin called Jock, which is obviously what the book's called, and it's named after him and my extraordinary relationship with him, really, and how he led me out of a pretty dark place and taught me a lot about myself and a lot about life.
So let's talk about the star of the show. Let's talk about Jock. So you got involved with the Port River Dolphin sanctuary. Is that what? Yeah. Is that what? Yeah.
It wasn't a sanctuary at that time. I guess you can call them a pod of dolphins. There were several pods, but pod of dolphins in the Port River. Yeah.
So can you give us a little insight on how Jock made himself known to you?
Again, I was super excited about going out on the boat with Mike, and I didn't know what to expect. And that first day that I went out, it was very early, and we putted out in this little dinghy, And we went into a sort of channel which is close to the Torrens Island Power Station. And I noticed this, what looked to be a dorsal fin, just circling this boat, which was moored in the middle of the river, and it was just circling this boat. And the dorsal fin itself was so badly mangled and scarred that it actually didn't look real. It looked artificial because it was so disfigured. And then, of course, I realised it was indeed attached to a dolphin. And this dolphin was just circling and circling. And gosh, he looked so alone. I knew that dolphins were social creatures, so I could not understand why this dolphin was just alone. And this repetitive behaviour, was it because he was so badly deformed? He was so badly scarred? Had he been shunned by other dolphins? I had no idea. Really unusual behaviour. But part of me just connected with him because he seemed quite, as I said, alone and sort of disconnected, I guess, from the other dolphins. And I felt really quite disconnected from the world in many ways. I was trying to find my own way, and I had my own internal scars that I was trying to heal. And, you know, this dolphin obviously had been badly physically scarred, and I wondered what had happened to his mother or his family. I just bonded with him immediately. I just immediately fell in love with this badly deformed dolphin, and that's exactly what it was, just instantaneous. And over a period of time, I got to know Jock very, very well. And although I was just one of Mike's research assistants who was helping him and who knew Jock, my bond with him and the way I felt about him and what he taught me, for me, was so incredibly special, because he was this completely wild dolphin who over almost 3 years embraced me, showed me unconditional acceptance and friendship. And this was something I had never experienced before. So it was a revelation. And we would spend, eventually, when I got into the water with him, and I want to add here that he was never enticed, we never fed him or anything like that. He approached us for that kind of interaction, the physical interaction. I learned how to trust, because how could I be in a water with a completely wild animal and feel completely at ease and connected with him without trusting him? So I learned all about trust again through my friendship, my relationship with this solitary wild dolphin. And it was a revelation, total revelation to me.
How often did you have the opportunity to spend in the water with Jock, Melody?
Would depend on the week. As I said, I
Right.
wasn't the only research assistant, but it was almost weekly, weather permitting. And when I wasn't, when we went off to see other dolphins and Mike was studying the other dolphins, or when I was, at home at night, I'd actually worry about Jock. I was quite concerned about his welfare and wondering more about his backstory, I guess, and how he'd come to be like this. And it was obvious to me that he was getting some sort of enrichment from his relationship with us. And I was certainly gaining a lot of enrichment with my relationship with him. I was learning so much and learning a lot about myself. Some of the experiences I had with him were extraordinary. I remember a time when I was in the water with him. He was very playful. He loved to play, and he was very mischievous, and it was just pure joy, just joy. Living in that moment of just pure joy was a revelation as well. But at one time, he put his snout underneath my feet, which were touching the river floor. The water was about up to my chest height, I guess, and he was nudging under my feet and kept nudging and nudging and nudging. And I yelled up to Mike, who was in the boat, "What is he doing? Why is he nudging my feet like this?" And he said, "Well, Mello, he thinks you're in trouble because dead things in the ocean sink to the bottom. And to have that kind of I don't know, that kind of acknowledgement and care from an animal who had clearly been very badly wounded by humans in the first place, and for him to show that kind of concern and compassion, I guess, was extraordinary, and it brought me to tears. I was just overcome with this gratitude of this wild animal wanting to make sure I was okay, because throughout my life I'd had very little of that.
How did these obvious, these times of obvious unconditional love coming from this beautiful creature, how did you find then that was impacting you in your life away from Jock from then?
Well, I was learning, as I said, more about trust, and I was opening my heart, really. And my heart was, I was kind of closed off, even though I had friends. I had a boyfriend at the time, and on the outside, I'm sure I seemed quite well adjusted, but internally, my heart was cut off. I didn't trust people, and I didn't trust the world, and I was just waiting for the next thing to hurt me, I suppose. So the fact that I had this unconditional acceptance from this completely wild animal in his own environment, not even in my environment, in his environment, which was the water, was allowed me to open up my heart enough to trust other people. So once that floodgate had been opened, I was able to say, yeah, okay, I think I can actually open up that part of myself again and learn to trust people, which is what happened. And I also really understood my place in the world, connecting with nature. And it wasn't just Jock, it was the other dolphins as well. And watching them, I learned a lot about life, the cycle of life, and the importance of not dwelling on my own pain and seeing the bigger picture, and embracing the joy of that moment as well. So all of these little lessons I took forward in my own life, and I learnt them all from Jock and the Port River Dolphins.
What made you decide to put pen to paper and write this beautiful story about you and Jock?
Well, I've been meaning to do it for ages, actually. It was one of those projects that I stopped and started and stopped. And I thought, I can't possibly write a book. Sure, I can write a news story, and with a bit of help, I can write a documentary, but writing a book, I just don't think I had it in me. But at the beginning of last year, I caught up with Mike. I come back to Adelaide quite a lot. And we were sitting at a restaurant, and he said to me, Mello, something's happening with the dolphins. The calves aren't surviving, and the population's it's plummeting. And that really tore at my heart, because after I finished my degree and got my first job, I ended up quitting a few months later to start a foundation to raise awareness about the Port River dolphins and their plight, which in turn ended up, I guess, helping the South Australian government at the time decide to declare a dolphin sanctuary. So I was really proud of that work, and I really hoped that sanctuary would help protect these dolphins that had played such a massive part of my life. So I was listening to Mike, and I just knew I had to do something. And so I went home, and I knew it was time for me to tell my story, and my very intimate story about my friendship with Jock and the other dolphins. I'd done lots of stories on the other dolphins. I'd even talked about my background at school visits, but I'd never really opened up about how much those dolphins, in particular Jock, had meant to me, and the impact they had on me. Because it's kind of, it's remarkable. It's one of those stories that people either say, what, really? Really, this dolphin helped you? So you're putting yourself out there by actually, I felt that I was very much putting myself out there by telling the story. but it was time, because I really wanted people to understand how special these Port River dolphins are, and why we need to protect them, and why the government and authorities need to ensure that they're around for the future, because they are incredibly special. I mean, very few places in the world have dolphins so close to a capital city as Adelaide, and you know, it's the only dolphin sanctuary in Australia. So yeah, there needs to be a concerted effort. So I felt that I needed to put the dolphins back in the spotlight, but I also felt it was time that I shared my story in the hope that it would help perhaps other people, or other young people in particular, who feel that you know, that they could be trapped in a cycle. If you're experiencing domestic violence, it's sometimes very hard to get yourself out of that darkness, and to think ahead, and to understand that you can escape, and you can actually move on. So I'm not a counsellor, but I hoped that what I'd learned, and the story that I share, helps in some way somebody find a bit of light, and find that thing that helps them get themselves out of that situation. Because domestic violence is one of those things, I think, that, you know, we didn't talk about it a lot, certainly in my day as a young woman, and still to this day I'm not sure we talk about it enough, and it's a difficult thing. Family is one of those sort of yeah, a lot of families don't want to talk about it. It's still somewhat closed. People don't feel quite comfortable enough to talk about it, and yet I think we should. And I think that's why stories, not just my story, but women who want to share their stories and feel comfortable in sharing their stories, it's so important, because that's how we all learn, that's how we all grow, and that's how we all teach each other. And so there were those two things. There was the dolphins, and the hope that somehow my story will empower other women, and help them realize that, you know, they have a voice, and they have power, and you've just got to take your power back, and find your passion.
Well, I think you've done an incredible job of marrying those two in your book, Melody, because you're absolutely right, especially with domestic abuse now. And you're right, even back in the early days. I mean, many people, men and women, who are or have experienced domestic abuse, you know, upon reflection, they can see that it actually did happen in their homes when they were children. But back in those days, it was, you know, behind closed doors, and it wasn't really talked about. And you're right, it's not talked about enough now either, even by governments and authorities. There seems to be this, you know, oh yes, that happens, but we don't want to, you know, get involved. Incredible people like yourself who take the time to go and put together not only your personal story, but marry it in with the power of a beautiful creature like Jock, and create something that can give hope to everybody, is exactly what is needed right now. And you've captured both, and I must say that I am very blessed. I live my hometown. I'm back in Adelaide now, in South Australia, and I live on the beach. And there is a family of dolphins that comes upon my beach every week. I'm very tempted, especially having read your book now, to don the wetsuit and go out there, but I think there's a law against that.
There might be. I think that if they approach you and you happen to be in the water, then that's fine. I think it's the whole enticing feeding thing. But it's much better in my mind than seeing them in captivity. I really don't like to see dolphins and whales in captivity, but that's another story altogether.
Yeah, look, absolutely. It's a brilliant book. Congratulations. Melody, where can people get a copy of A Dolphin Called Jock?
In all of the good bookstores, actually. There's a lot of great bookstores in South Australia that are stocking it, including Imprints and, of course, QBD. It was their book of the month for June, so they've been really supportive. Dimmicks, all of the good ones stock it. So you can get it online, of course, but I don't think there's anything quite like walking into a bookstore and picking up a book and just flicking through it, because there's some great photos in that book too.
I was going to mention that, and we haven't, especially like the ones with the horses.
Oh yes.
By the way. But there are, I don't, it's not going to come up on our video on this, but we will, my team will put together a collage on this. The photographs in here absolutely complement and pepper the words in this book. It really is quite powerful.
Thank you. And that means an awful lot to me. It really does. It wasn't an easy thing to write, but it was joyful and in many ways as well. And I just hope that it makes a very small difference in the world. And if it does that, I'll be very happy.
Well, I think that, certainly here at Sheroes Unlimited, we have got it as our book of the month. We definitely do recommend A Dolphin Called Jock to all of you who are listening or watching right now. And as Melody said, you can get this book in all good bookstores. And if they don't have it, tell them they're not a good bookstore and tell them that they have to get it straight away.
Love yours.
Or if you want to get a copy, just contact us here at SheroesUnlimited.com and we will send you all the details on how to get a copy of this. And also, can I suggest, great Christmas gift as well. So now is the time to start stocking up and getting impactful presents for Christmas. But also, I would implore any of you who are listening right now or watching this with Melody and myself, if you know somebody who is experiencing or has experienced domestic abuse, can I suggest you might like to gift them a copy of this book? I think that if you're wondering what can I do to help them, you might want to start with a copy of this book and gift it to them. So that's my little recommendation.
That's lovely. Thank you, Jaynie. In fact, I've just got to add really quickly that since the book's been out, I've had some amazing messages from people. I don't know them. They've just contacted me and told me their stories and commented on the fact that they felt connected with the books as they were reading it and felt that it helped them also understand their own story. And so that's been amazing. And I'm so grateful to everybody who's done that, because once again, it makes it worthwhile.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful book. Congratulations, Melody. And thank you so much for being my guest today on Behind the Book, Sheroes Unlimited Behind the Book podcast. And before I let you go, it's not out yet, but our next issue of our Sheroes Unlimited magazine is out very soon. And of course, your extended story is in there with lots of fantastic photographs. So again, to our listeners and our viewers right now, make sure that if you haven't subscribed already at SheroesUnlimited.com to receive your copy of our Sheroes Unlimited magazine, jump online and do that straight away so that you don't miss that, because that story in the magazine with Melody is fantastic. Melody, thank you again so much for being my very special guest today on Sheroes Unlimited Behind the Book podcast.
Thank you so much, Jaynie. It's been so lovely seeing you again, and a big kiss to you. Thank you.
You too, thank you. And if you've enjoyed listening to this podcast as much as I, as always, have enjoyed bringing it to you, then you know what to do. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Just subscribe, make sure you never miss an episode. And also like and share. And if you've got any questions or any comments, just pop them below wherever you're listening or watching this episode of Sheroes Unlimited Behind the Book podcast. www.SheroesUnlimited.com is our address. My name's Jaynie Morris, and wherever you are in this amazing, beautiful world of ours, you know what to do. Create an absolutely fabulous day.